This is an Ashur Commander review. This is the newest archer in Rise of Kingdoms, and I'm not going to ruin the pronunciation of a historical figure, so I'm going to keep it down to Ash or Ashur for the rest of this video. But in today's video, we're going to be going over his skills, his talents, what you're going to want to use for formations, what you're going to want to use for pairings, and where I think he's going to fit in the meta. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's talk about the skills. His primary skill is a AoE fan that does 1500 damage factor, of course with the standard reduction for additional targets down to 50%, and then an extra direct damage factor to the target. So the main target of your rally is going to take 2500 damage factor total, which could be reduced slightly lower based on the 1500 AoE, but then successive targets are also hit. So this is basically his way of resisting swarm. It is a fan, so he's going to be able to be hit from the rear end of his formation because the fan's only going to hit stuff in front of him. But overall, it's a decent damage factor, and it does a lot more damage to the single target, making him great against garrisons. The second skill gives 20% attack, and then 20% defense and 15% march speed off of Alliance territory. This is very similar to Nebu's skill, where it gives him a good amount of attack, good amount of defense, good amount of march speed, good mobility. It is more stat padding, but it's also worth noting that when you're rallying, you're going to be spending 99% of your time off of Alliance territory. So definitely useful in the long run. His third skill is a 20% skill damage boost, which is very, very good. And then whenever your troop uses an active skill while attacking a city or stronghold, so that includes buildings, the target deals 20% less normal attack damage for the next 3 seconds. So this is pretty much straight up a Gorgo counter here, and that's the goal of it. The 20% less normal damage essentially kneecaps Gorgo and makes her a lot weaker, on top of the fact that you have the troop advantage, and then the skill damage bonus helps you overcome her weakness. The fourth skill is a 15% less normal damage taken, again, pretty much to counter Gorgo, Zenobia, and any of the white damage infantry commanders. And then if this commander is leading a rally, whenever you deal direct damage, it has a 50% chance to gain another 3% bonus to skill damage for 10 seconds, stacking up to 10 times. And then it resets whenever you gain another stack. So as you start to build up, you can get up to 30% bonus skill damage. So when you also add it with the 20% you're getting here, you do have a ton of extra damage. And then the normal damage also helps counter, again, white damage commanders. And overall, this is going to be really, really painful for infantry commanders. Between the normal damage reduction and the skill damage boosts, it's going to hurt a lot. The expertise is a unique one, which I think is kind of fascinating. So whenever you use an active skill, you gain one of these 4 buffs. So you get 30% attack, 30% health, 30% defense, 20% more normal damage, or 20% more skill damage. This is an or, so you get one of these 5. It's random, so you might get attack, you might get health, you might get normal damage, you might get skill damage. Overall, each of these buffs do help him though. And the fact that you have access to the skill tree means you're going to be casting a lot of skills, which is super useful as well. So overall, these skills are honestly pretty solid for him and are a great kit that is pretty clearly designed to counter Gorgo. Next, let's talk talents. So Ashur has Archer, Conquering, and Skill. So it's the same talent tree as Nebu. And honestly, when you look at his kit, he's very much like a Nebu 2.0. So we're going to look at Nebu's talents, and I set up a mock talent setup for what I expect Ashur to be. Overall, this is a personal preference thing too. And for me, I like having the guaranteed 6% more skill damage, but 6% more skill damage taken, which is super underrated because you're going to use him to counter normal damage commanders. So the 6% more skill damage taken is going to do nothing to harm you. The 6% more additional damage is nice. The 8% more skill damage is nice. I got 1% more normal damage here. You could go more if you wanted. You could go with rage per attack. But the big thing you definitely want here is the feral nature, because you want the extra rage, because you want more skills, so his expertise gets used more often, especially since there's no marked cooldown on that expertise. So the other thing is, again, 60 rage after use. This skill tree is very useful, and you should go to the 5 out of 5 here. Alternatively, if you want to go into Entrenched, you could sacrifice some talent points here, here, and then you could sacrifice the additional skill damage here, and the latent power here, and you can get to that point because that frees up 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and then you just have to take ranks out of this, which it's your decision, but I just feel like you get better results here with especially with this one against Gorgo, since the skill damage is, there's no downside to this talent now. And then of course the additional damage is nice for different pairings, on top of the fact that I believe it does trigger with the secondary trigger of direct damage to the target you're attacking. And if not, you can then focus it out to here, because the normal damage is always going to be good to resist Swarm, and getting rage on attacks is just going to be better for overall results on average. Next, let's talk formations. Really, there's not a lot to talk about with formations, but I'm going to go over it briefly. You're going to make the best use out of course, having wedge formation, because all of his damage is skill damage. The normal damage doesn't do a lot for you. Hollow square on the damage reduction is a little bit to increase his tankiness, but he doesn't really need it because he's going to be doing so much damage to that garrison that it's going to be kind of scary for anybody in the field. And when you're running a rally, you oftentimes want to make sure you have control of the field anyway, where a swarm won't be an issue. So 99 times out of 100, you're probably going to see him rolling with wedge formation, just because you can make so much use out of the bonus skill damage you're already getting, plus all the passives you can get on the specialty inscriptions. You can generally just do a lot more damage. For stats, you want to focus on health where you can. Of course, damage reduction if you can get it, because it never hurts to have it. Skill damage dealt is very, very good too. Defense is good. March speed is useful, especially if you're planning on using him at a further rate, but it becomes less of a factor the closer and tighter the fighting becomes. So for players who are going to be frontline fighters, who are going to run rallies from the front line all the time, you could substitute some of that march speed for more defense or more attack if you have it, or of course more damage reduction or damage dealt. Now let's talk pairings. Really, the one that sticks out most to me is Henry, and that seems to be already agreed upon as the best option for him. Between the skill damage dealt and the skill damage bonuses, you tack on 10% less skill damage taken, which is great. You tack on some additional defense and march speed, so between the two of these, you get a bunch of attack, a bunch of defense, and 35% march speed off of Alliance territory. You get an additional 30% counterattack damage, and then a 10% chance to increase the skill damage the defense is going to receive. So then you increase it by 30%, then you increase your own skill damage by another 70%, potentially. Plus you have the expertise that can trigger for even more. And this becomes a very, very dangerous march pair that can put out a lot of damage on infantry, and can even hurt some cavalry marches. Of course, you have the additional damage dealt that's flat, and then when you hit with the base attack, you get the direct damage factor, which you can then use off of the talents that you have with Asher. Of course, you could also just use Henry primary here too, but I like the skill tree a lot personally, and that's just me. And of course, the expertise is where it really comes together, because you take 20% less normal damage on top of 20% less normal damage dealt by Asher's primary, or rather passive, and 30% more normal damage taken dealt by this commander's march. So then you get a lot of additional white damage to resist swarm, while you also are reducing the enemy's ability for the majority of the fight to deal their primary form of damage. This is just a generally solid pairing, and this is really the A+ pairing you're going to see in most uses. You could additionally pair Asher with Liang or YSG for AoE damage if you're anticipating swarm, but I don't recommend it because you're just hamstringing yourself versus what you could do with Henry. So it's one of those where it's almost like Amani Artemisia, where they do fit perfectly within one another as a kit. So it would really be a disservice to not use the two of them together. So 99% of the time, this is what you're going to want. So where's Asher going to be in the meta? Honestly, I think he's really, really good. And it's going to be giving infantry garrison mains fits for quite a bit of time to come. He pretty much exists as a straight counter to Gorgo's main way of dealing damage and being so tenacious as she is in the current meta. But other than that, I do have some concerns about his ability to resist Swarm, because there's not a lot to resist Swarm. There is a lot of randomness on his expertise, which is unique, but it does open up some concerns, because the main reason the whole versatility talent tree is so bad is because it is opening itself up to randomness over consistency. So I do have some consistency concerns with the expertise, but it does have the benefit of all 5 of them being beneficial in some way. So it's not punishing you like some of the other talents or some other options are. Overall, I think he'll be very much at the front of the meta. I do think that he'll have a lot of issues with Jan Hera, and I still see some preliminary tests that seem to see that he holds really well, Jan does, against Asher. But as a way to break the deadlock that's being caused by Gorgo Constantine and Gorgo Zenobia, I definitely think that he's going to be relevant and he's going to be a worthwhile investment, just looking at the raw stats. The other thing I also think is that he did 20% less normal damage on this when you're attacking a city, but overall you get a good amount of bonus. You lose out on the 30% skill damage, which makes him less viable in the field, but he might fit into a pseudo Nebu role where he is a secondary March Bear option in the field, but time will have to tell on that. He does do a lot of damage, and the secondary damage on this is not required to be on a garrison. So you might see him using this more often, and you might see him replacing Nebu to some extent in the field just because of his damage output. But honestly, time will have to tell on that for certain. The only thing that I can definitely say is that Asher and Henry is going to be giving Gorgo significant fits for quite some time to come. But with that, we'll conclude our discussion on Asher. I do think he's going to be a heavy hitter in the meta for some time. I know he's going to get Gorgo fits, and I am very much interested to see in the long run how Jan will hold up against him. And I am very much looking forward to seeing him square up against my Jan here in the battlefield. So let me know what you think. Do you think he's going to be the one-size-fits-all rally meta? Let me know in the comments. If you want to see me cover another commander or another topic, let me know down there as well, because comments often become future video topics. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.